Welcome. We're about to get started, and I'm very happy and honored to introduce our keynote speaker today. We have a conversation with Lori J. Robinson. She was the first female officer in the history of the United States Armed Forces to command a major unified combatant command. In this conversation, we'll learn how she navigated her journey at United States Northern Command and as a commander of the North American, excuse me. That is me in the background. I apologize there. I wasn't muted. Let me just take that back a little bit for you. So in this conversation, we'll learn how she navigated her journey as a United States Northern Command and as a commander of the North American Aerospace Defense Command. This conversation was made possible by our platform sponsor, Infor. Okay, and I will take it, pass this over to the conversation. Enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hunter. General Robinson, super excited to have you here. Can we start with you just telling us a little bit of detail about your life before you decided to serve?
Well, I would love to. First of all, I'm honored that you all would ask me to be a part of all of this. I can't think of anything else more important than talk about veterans and their families and thank them and their families for serving. So thank you for asking me to be a part of this. So it's really interesting. My dad was in the Air Force. I am the oldest of five. From the oldest to the youngest is 6 years. And so you can imagine my dad is, well, first my mom's a hero, right? But so my dad is kind of thinking about college for us and all of that. And he says to me, Lori, why don't you consider going to the Air Force Academy? And I was like, hey, Dad, I've done this Air Force thing for 18 years. I'm done. I'm not doing the Air Force at all. So I ended up going to the University of New Hampshire because it was my state of residence. My grandparents lived there. My parents are getting ready to move back overseas, and I wanted to teach. As I went through, I realized they were going to ask me to do a 5th year, and a 5th year in college was not in my plan. So I decided to join ROTC and get a commission and hang out for about 4 years. It didn't quite work out like that. So that's kind of how I got there, totally unpredicted, totally not planned, totally, not within the things that I was thinking about what I would do with my life.
Wow. And here we are.
Here we are, exactly.
We are as well very honored to have you here and sharing your experience with us. All right. So that's super helpful to kind of know a little bit about how you got into it. I think something that I would love to hear a little bit more about, being part of a rather male-dominated Air Force, you have truly outshined many around you. How does it feel to be the first woman to have led a top-tier U.S. combat command?
So first of all, honored and humbled, right? I mean, if you think about the process, first of all, the process to just become a general officer, just to get promoted in the military, right? And then to become a general officer, then to become a 4-star, and then the process of becoming a combatant commander. In my job, in my last one, U.S. Northern Command commander, but also NORAD command commander. So in the U.S. Northern Command commander, I worked directly for the Secretary of Defense, and so I had to get nominated by the president. In my NORAD hat, I had to get nominated by the president, but also approved by the Prime Minister of Canada. So just thinking about that whole process part, the fact that Lori Robinson is going to get nominated by the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada, is overwhelming to me, honored and humbled. But what I would tell you is that the trust and confidence over the years of my entire career that people had in me, independent of my gender, independent of, as I always say, the badge I wore, the fact that they put me in places of trust over time, very male dominated, right? I worked in what we call our combat air forces, and all my mentors are fighter pilots. I don't have a single female mentor. But if you think about that, how looking forward is that mentoring somebody that doesn't look like you, and putting somebody in a place of trust and confidence, that doesn't look like you. So there's this balance of that, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's really powerful, right? To be mentored by folks that may not be able to like really identify with you on certain pieces, but like you said, they really saw that and they
Yes.
saw something in you and wanted to cultivate it.
It's a great point. Probably my biggest mentor back at the day is still my mentor today, and he still keeps in touch. Well, I still work with him, and so I did ask him one time. I said, so how did you even pluck me out? Except for I was the only woman, right? So I was pretty visible, but and his comment was to what you just said. I saw something there, and which is awesome. And it had nothing to do with me being a woman. It had everything to do with me being competent at what I did.
Right. Absolutely. No, I love that. And a part of me also wonders how much of you being able to really outshine those around you has got to do with your own passion to serve your people and your country.
So I loved what I did back then, right? In my formative years, I call my time at Nellis Air Force Base at the United States Air Force. Then it was called the Fighter Weapons School. And for your audience, that's the Air Force equivalent of Top Gun, but better. And so, those were some real formative years for me. And I loved what I did. I loved doing my job. I loved being an instructor there. I loved being a part of a team. And so that passion of doing that just kind of continued, throughout my career. But what I learned over time was the passion, not just for doing the job, but my passion for the airmen and their families, and for, what we provided to the Department of Defense and capability.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. I mean, something I want to go back to a little bit, you were talking about how, being a woman, you were definitely visible. But in a video for Time, you actually said, I am a general, I am a commander, I am an airman, and I just happen to be a woman, and would love for you to elaborate a little bit on that.
So it starts out with, and I'm going to go back to my formative years, my mentor, he said something when I was a young one, and he said, you're a part of something bigger than yourself. And I was like, what does that mean? It's all about me. I want to be the best at what I'm doing, right?
Of course.
Over time, right? And over time, what I realized was that it actually was not about me, that it was actually about the institution. And it was about making the institution better. And so if you make everybody around you better, then the institution gets better. But if I made being a woman more important than all those other things, then it became about me and not about making everybody around me better. And so it's this notion that I have all these titles and I happen to be a woman, but being a woman is not the most important part. But what I also do talk about, Zara, is I do realize I did do something different, and that I am a role model. And I take that very, very seriously. And I know the power of that, but I didn't want being a woman being the most important part.
Right.
I wanted that to be, and I happen to be a woman because like you, like everybody of the women out in the audience, or, the people that, we consider from a difference perspective, if you will. We want to be promoted and done based on capability. Right. Not because we are a woman.
Right. No one wants to be tokenized. Absolutely.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, as you were just talking about, I would love to also hear from you, in what ways has your gendered position as a woman in turn either empowered or motivated you to really excel at your work?
Yeah. So as you saw in that Time magazine interview, when you're the only woman on the radio, It's good if you're doing good, and it's bad if you're not doing so good, right? So the good news is, you can stand out, which what motivated me was to be the best. What motivated me was to make, I tell people the best compliment I ever got during that time, my formative years back there, and it transcended because of now my reputation. But people say, when I go to war, I want Lori on the radio. I can't, as a weapons controller talking to fighter pilots, I can't imagine a better compliment than that, right? The trust and confidence that they had in me. Right. So, when I sit there and I think about that trust and confidence, that started a reputation. And it became, over time, and it had nothing to do, the only part about being the woman is I was the different voice on the radio. Right. But what happened over time is that trust and confidence grew and grew and expanded and expanded. And again, I got put in places that we hadn't put women. I got put in places that we hadn't put my badge of weapons controller or air battle manager because of the trust and confidence. And it started back in those formative years, because when they went to war, they wanted me on the radio.
Right. And so, it sounds like you were very supported by your counterparts, but
Yes.
Did you ever feel like your community was a hurdle in your growth?
So no, quite frankly, quite opposite. And I'll give you a great story. When I got nominated for my 4th star to go be the commander of Pacific Air Forces, there were some incredibly nasty blogs. And for the sake of the audience, I won't articulate them, but they were horrible. And one of the folks that I had worked with early on, who had known me forever, basically came up on the blogs and said, I can't think of anybody, and it was a fighter pilot, male. I can't think of anybody more qualified to go do this job than Lori Robinson. And so the support mechanism that I got, first of all, throughout my career, but just that one little instance where it was very powerful. And he was a 4-star general. He was a very prominent in our Air Force at the time. He's still very prominent. But, for him to come up like that and say that very publicly, and to lend that kind of support was huge. But I always felt nothing but support from all my mentors, again, all men, and really the community that I had the pleasure to grow up in. And it was Combat Air Forces. The first female fighter pilot came about, I want to say, it was about 7 years after I entered the Air Force. So that kind of lets kind of the fraternity, for the lack of a better word, that I was entering.
Right. No, absolutely. And I welcome the audience to submit any questions that you might have for General Robinson as we're kind of chatting. And, she has a very unique story. So I'm sure folks want to learn a little bit more as well. And I think something that you were just talking about, General Robinson, is so interesting because at Power to Fly, we're always talking about these concepts like allyship and like really being able to show up for others. And just even what you just said about, a coworker of yours, a colleague of yours, right, who has a lot of standing within the community is a general, was able to share like, no, Lori is the right person for this role, and what impact that must have had on other people, and like really being able to show up for you. And I think that is a beautiful example of that as well.
It's so powerful, right? It's not, how do I want to say this? It's not, you feel like you need validation, right. But when you have somebody like that say that very publicly, and everybody was like, well, if he said it, it must be true, right? Not that it wasn't true, but just to have somebody be on your team,
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And be able to share that, like you said, in a public way, that does definitely have an impact for sure.
It does.
And you were mentioning, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and it builds your own confidence too, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, like you said, it's not like you need it, right. But it's so nice when you do have it.
That's right. That's exactly right.
No, I totally hear that. And you started mentioning how, when you first entered the military, there was like another female that was also like rising up through the ranks. Since your time, the military has incorporated various opportunities for women. Would you say that this incorporation has made the necessary impact?
So since my time, we have opened up all jobs in the department, not just the Air Force, but all jobs in the department for the military to everybody. So as long as you're qualified and you meet the qualifications for whatever job they're putting you in or you've asked to be in, as long as you meet the qualifications, and you're held to the same standards, right? Everybody needs to, that's why we have standards, and you meet those standards, you can be in any position in any job. That's different than when I came in. And I would tell you, I think that has been a very powerful thing when we talk about, equality. I did a speech a few years ago, and one of the themes of my speech was, the military is a meritocracy, right? Everybody enters as a second lieutenant from an officer perspective. Everybody enters, as a E1 from an enlisted perspective. You get promoted based on capability and potential. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. Nothing's perfect, but at least, and we've continued to grow. Are there things that I think we can do better as a military? I do from a, how do we keep women in? There's some efforts going along with that. But we continue to grow. And I think that's what is really important.
I actually want to expand a little bit on what you were just talking about. Like, what other aspects would you say are really important in terms of diversity and inclusion of not just women, but like every gender?
So to me, if I, as a commander, and we'll just use my last two jobs, what was important to me was a couple things. One was to set the tone in the room where people were comfortable to tell the boss, not just the good, because you need to hear the good, especially if we're gonna compliment people and the things that they've done. But what you really want to hear is the bad and the ugly. Right. And so it's important to you to set the tone. So you can set the tone, but what you really want is different voices around the table. And so whether it's different services, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, you just need difference around your table. And once you've set the tone and you've got that difference around the table, then you need to do a good job of listening, not talking, but listening, and provide all of that space, for people to tell you, whether you're trying to decide on courses of action to defense or whatever the task at hand is. The importance is, having those, again, we're growing, right? We are thinking much more and more about it and putting everybody, and giving everybody the capability to sit around the table. And I tell everybody this, and then I'll be quiet. The hardest lesson I learned was to learn to listen. And it's probably the most powerful lesson I learned.
No, absolutely. And I think you touch on such a good point there. Even here at like Power to Fly, when we talk about diversity, folks are so quick to immediately talk about like gender and race, which are the most common. But again, there's so much richness in people's different experiences, different backgrounds. Like you were saying, when you really think about bringing folks to the table and bringing those different perspectives, like that's where the diversity comes in for sure. So yes. I appreciate you naming that. We do have a question from the audience.
Okay.
So how would you say the position of women in the military and as veterans today has changed? With your experience, you must have seen it evolve.
I did. So let's talk about a couple things. Over time, again, I'll talk about something very tactical. We started having female fighter pilots, right? When I first got in, women were not allowed to be fighter pilots. So now we've got female fighter pilots. We've also put women in roles and responsibilities. I'll use me as the example, in command responsibilities that heretofore had never happened. And then as I look to the future, so, everybody's like, well, you're the first, combatant commander. You know what we just did in the last month? We just confirmed and put in 2 more women as combatant commanders, So while I was the first, the best news is I wasn't the last. And so, I think the notion of, putting people in places is wonderful, but it's making sure that it's not a one-off, making sure that we continue the thought process.
Absolutely. And ensuring that there's the correct supports once they are in that position, right?
Correct.
Absolutely. So another question that someone has, and thank you for sharing that is exciting to sort of hear opportunities but consistent access to those opportunities, like you were saying. So another question is, what are some of the new amendments that the government has introduced to increase the participation and growth of women in the forces?
Okay, so I'm not sure exactly what amendments are being talked about, but what I will
Whatever
say,
you can share.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure, so I don't want to say. I don't.
Of course.
I don't have the total context in my head.
Right.
But what I will say is that I think some of the things that they're thinking about is how do we, have more maternity and paternity leave, right? How do we? How long is it? And I think we're looking at, okay, when a woman gives birth, when does she have to do her next PT test, right? I mean, given, having to recover from all of that.
Right.
Also from a deployment perspective, I think those are some things that are being talked about. Is there a way that you can do an interruption of your time, but come back into the force and not be looked like you're behind your peers.
Right.
So some of those things I think maybe is what the question is about. And I think those are all good things,
right.
Because what it does is it allows women to stay in longer so that we can, and they can reach higher ranks and higher positions of authority and not feel they have to get out.
Right. And that's what we were just talking about, right? Like making sure we have the right systems in place to support the growth of all types of people, right? And in this case, ensuring that we have an eye on like what women might need to really feel supported within the workplace. And as you were mentioning, around motherhood or around, other areas as well. So that's definitely helpful to kind of hear you remind us that is being prioritized.
It is. It's being discussed. I don't know where we are in process, but sure. I know those are all things that are in discussion or have been discussed and have been solidified, to keep people in.
Right. No, absolutely. So, I mean, your journey as a commanding officer really started with you combating the various stereotypes that could have possibly kept you and are still keeping a lot of women from their true potential. What would you say were the stereotypes that were associated with your chosen duty as a veteran? And what value has that added to the life you have led and the differences that you have made?
Well, thanks. So, again, I felt my stereotype was not just being a woman, but what my profession was. And I didn't get to choose it. The Air Force chose it for me. In fact, I would tell you when I was in ROTC, my professor of aerospace science, when he found out what I was going to do, he was like, call your dad, get out of it. It's going to be horrible. You're never going to get promoted. Right. And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm not calling my dad to help me with anything. I'm on my own now. Right. So there was that beginning of a stereotype. Now, some things changed in the Air Force that didn't remain as one. But I think as my career field grew and I happened to be, one, have great mentors, and two, kind of be in the right place at the right time, I never felt like I was being put down, but I always felt that I could always look forward. And so I tried really hard during my career, if I had the capability and capacity to make a difference, I tried to, and for not for me, but because I was a part of something bigger than myself,
right?
But for people behind me.
Yeah, and I mean, what is your message to aspiring audience members?
Remember, you are a part of something bigger than yourself. That if we think about the importance of what we do every day, of course, it's important to do your very, very best. We have this thing in the Air Force that's called being a snacko, and that's making sure that the snack drawer is full and, the beer drawer is full, and especially for Friday afternoons, right?
Right.
So I would always say to people, if you're asked to be the snacko, be the best snacko you can be, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this notion that you should try hard to do the very best you can each and every day, because that's what's important, both to you personally, I think, but also for being a part of something bigger than yourself. And for me, it was, to say it differently, the responsibility of a leader is to make new leaders and better leaders.
I love that. I love that. Right. Is like being able to sort of build that path for folks to follow
Correct.
behind you. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Exactly.
So we have a question. When
Yes.
it comes to support, did you have the sort of emotional and familial support to get through your choice to serve and shine as a woman? Or did people think it was holding you back from other responsibilities that you had as a woman?
Oh, that is a great question. First of all, growing up, my parents were incredible. I think I feel so blessed that I had such an amazing childhood. And my parents, we moved every 2 and 3 years, right? And my mother would always say, guess what we get to go do? It wasn't, oh my gosh, we're moving again,
Right.
but guess we get to go do. So from that, but then, I have this amazing husband. So he's a retired 2-star. He's a fighter pilot. He was a Thunderbird pilot. And when we were making a decision, they were going to send him to Korea and me to Japan. And I was basically, I'll get out because you're a fighter pilot. You got promoted early. You're going to be a general, and I'm not. And he smiled and he said, and what would you do if you got out? And I was like, I don't know. He's like, you stay in. And he went to the reserves and flew for the airlines. But talk about support. When I became the commander of Pacific Air Forces, he had retired from the Air Force and retired from the airlines. And we had the privilege to go visit airmen and their families around the theater. And so here I am, going into the fighter squadrons and doing all that stuff. And he's going to the child care centers. I mean, he continues to be unbelievable amount of support. And in fact, we don't say we're General and General Robinson. We say we're Team Robinson, because it's Team Robinson that goes and does things. And the amount of support that I have from him throughout my career and through today still is just incredible. And I'm the luckiest wife in the world.
I love that. I love that. The Team Robinson. I love that. So we have time for one more question. I know we have about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
So Alexia asked, General Robinson, ma'am, what are your thoughts on the pay disparity between enlisted and commissioned officers, regardless of gender, race, or otherwise, specifically considering E9s who advise and provide counsel to general officers such as yourself with the meat and potatoes of the people whom you lead?
Yeah, so, I guess I would have to be a little more strategic in answering that question.
Sure.
I guess I think what's important is maybe what we really should look at is the pay across the board, and looking and the point is a great point. I mean, I had a couple of command chiefs that advised me that were just incredible. And so I needed their advice and I trusted their counsel. So the question really more is, should we look back at pay writ large, and do we have it right? And then should we sit back and contemplate, an E9 that is a command chief in my world or a command sergeant major, should they get a quote unquote a bonus for doing that versus what an E9 does day in and day out? Because there are E9s that don't do advising commanders. So it's a great question. It's an interesting question. I hadn't really contemplated, but I would suggest to do a bigger, broader study. Thought, do we have it right? And then maybe add on a couple of disclaimers. And do we need to add a bonus for that?
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And again, your honesty and your transparency is always definitely appreciated here. So General Robinson, as we wrap up, I just want to give you some space. If there's anything else that you would like to share with the audience, feel free to do so.
Zara, thank you. First of all, thank you this was fun. I love these kind of conversations. I think it's incredibly important. And again, I just want to thank your audience and your veterans in the audience and your families that supported them. I used to always say all the time, we would have it easy to deploy, Meanwhile, the car is breaking down at home. So thank everybody for what they did, supporting and defending the Constitution, and continuing to ensure our freedoms that we should treasure here in the United States.
Thank you so much for your time, General Robinson, for your just sharing of your experience. I think this was really enlightening conversation for everyone who attended. So just a huge thank you. We are honored and humbled as well that you were able to share your experience with us today.
Thanks, Zara. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.